Hey everyone, today we are going to talk about percentages, just as an introduction though. So to start off, percent, the two words per and cent, means by the hundred or divided by 100. So already that word has a lot of math involved in it, right? It's telling us division and it's telling us a number, dividing by 100. The word cent probably sounds very familiar to you because we can see it in actual cents. Pennies, 100 pennies are in $1. 100 years, we call that a century. And then per is the division part. Per. Um, there are 4 apples per basket. So all the apples are divided into 4 for each basket, 4 per basket. So percentages, we also see them in obviously your grades, right? 0% as the lowest, 100% as the highest. You see it in forecasts, weather forecasts. Today there is a 100% chance of rain. That means it definitely will rain. Or 0% chance. And then obviously there's numbers in between as well, right? We have, let's say, 35% chance. So there's the range. When we talk about percentages, we're not just talking about the whole of 100, defining by 100, but there's also a part, a number out of 100, a part and a whole. And then there's also numbers or percentages greater than 100%. Sometimes you can get extra credit. You can get 105%, right? So it's not just a stopping point there. So I often hear people say, oh, give it your 110%. And somebody will say, that's not mathematically correct. Actually, yeah, it is. So you can have beyond that whole of 100. You can have a 200%, 300%. It's all mathematically possible. Any number can be divided by 100. Percent, like we see up here, is a fraction with 100 as the denominator. So it's that part out of that whole. Or you can see it as a decimal, because a decimal is just another way of writing a fraction. So as long as it is out of 100, you have a percent right there. So what is 1/2 as a percent? Well, 1/2 is the same as 50 out of 100. So it is really 50%. All this should be in your notes, what the definition of percent is, which is dividing by 100, that it's a part out of a whole, and that it has 100 as the denominator. If we look at this part right here, that's giving us the fraction 38/100ths with 100 as its denominator, we can see, like we talked about up there, the 38/100ths is the same as 38%. So it's really just your numerator whenever you have a fraction out of 100, 38%. This right here is super important for you to add to your notebook because it will basically deal with one of our methods later when we are talking about how to solve percent problems. 100% is 100 out of 100. It's the entire pie, the whole thing, 100 out of 100. And as we know, any fraction with the same numerator as the denominator is really just that number being divided by itself, which is equal to 1. So 100% is the same as 100 out of 100 or 1. That's why in your double number line of 0% all the way up to 100%, it's the same as 0% is the same as 0, 100% is the same as 1, 50%, like this problem we did over here, is the same as a half. So percentages can be written as fractions, can be written as decimals. Percent is just a special way of writing things where we know it is always out of 100. Let's use what we learned then to solve example 1 from the book. They want us to express each of the following as a percent. Remember, percent means out of 100. Okay? So for A, 7/20ths, if we want a number out of 100, one method that we can use is just finding, just basically changing 7/20ths into a fraction that also has 100 on the bottom now. So we need to multiply by the factor 5, out of 5 actually, so that we keep it as 1. So that we keep 7/20ths, that amount the same, but we're writing it as a different format. 20 times 5 is 100, 7 times 5 is 35. 35 out of 100, percent is out of 100, so this is really 35%. All of these are equal to each other. 7/20ths is the same as 35/100ths, which is the same as 35%, because percent is out of 100. Now, since we know that 100% is equal to 100 out of 100, or 5 out of 5, and that's also equal to 1, we could also, instead of multiplying by 5 out of 5, we could just multiply by 100%, because remember, 100% is the same as 1, right? And if we multiply 7/20ths times 1, we don't change anything. So this is actually a really popular method that people like to use, is just multiplying by 100%. Because when I do that, and I can put this over 1, 7 times 100 is on top, 20 times 1 is on the bottom, which is still 20, and I can just slap on a percent there. So this is really 700 divided by 20 in my calculator, which is 35. So this is 35%. Okay, because remember, multiplying by 100% is the same as multiplying by 1. Now be sure that you put in the percent, because if you just take a number and multiply by 100, you changed it. It is now 100 times bigger. But remember, 100% is really just 1. So it doesn't change anything. You're just writing it in a different format. Again, this method a lot of people like to use because it's pretty straightforward, out of 100. Now, if you remember, percent is divide by 100, right? Percent. So you're probably thinking to yourself, why are we multiplying by 100 now? Now, the percent part is just saying this part right here. The divide by 100. This is the divide by 100 they're talking about, the part where I'm writing in bold. Okay, this part is divide by 100. This right here is a method on how to get to a different format. The divide by 100 they were talking about before is just this part right here, the out of 100. Okay, so don't get those two confused. One is just part of the definition of what percent is. This multiply by 100% is just getting it to a different format by just multiplying by 1. Okay. Let's go ahead and look at B. So for B, we have 1 1/3. And honestly, I wouldn't use that first method, because if I'm trying to get to 100, wow, 3 is a terrible number to get to 100, right? Nothing is going to multiply by 3 evenly to get to 100. So again, that's why people prefer that second method, because you can just multiply by 100% and then you'll get your answer. Now in this problem, it's a mixed number, so you're going to want to change it into a improper fraction in order to easily multiply by 100%. 1 1/3 so that'll be 1 whole and a third, is really 4/3, right? Because this is 1/3, 2/3, 3/3, 4/3. You can also figure this out by multiplying your denominator by your mixed number and then adding your remainder here. So 3 times 1, which is 3, plus 1 is 4. That's how you get the 4/3. So 4/3 times 100%, remember it's percent, not just 100, is 400 on top, 4 times 100, divided by 3 on the bottom. Okay, and then we have percent as our answer. This is an improper fraction. 400 thirds% isn't really helping anybody, right? Remember, we want to write our answer where it makes the most sense for people. We don't give people percents as improper fractions. If anything, we give them to them as mixed numbers, right? So let's go ahead and solve for this answer. 400 divided by 3. If you're ever confused how to set up your division, you can remember tie bow or tying a bow. The top number goes inside. 400 goes inside. Bottom number goes outside. Okay, so 3 goes into 4 one time. The remainder of 1, bring down the 0. 3 goes into 10 3 times. 3 times 3 is 9. Remainder of 1, bring down the 0 again. 3 times 3 is 9. Remainder of 1, stop right there. This 1 will give you your fraction. So it's 133 1/3. 133 1/3%. That makes more sense if you're telling somebody the answer. 133 1/3%. That's more than 100%, right? Because this is more than 1. 1 whole would equal to 100%. So then 1 1/3, it would make sense that it would be more than 100%. 133 1/3%. Because it's 100% plus a little bit more. Let's try C now. C tells us it's 0.326, or this is actually 326 thousandths. Because if you read your decimal places, this is your tenths, this is your hundredths, and this is your thousandths. Right? So it kind of tells you what your denominator is going to be. It's going to be out of 1,000. Now here, because it's out of 1,000, you can use either method. So I could get it to 100 on the bottom, my denominator, by dividing by 10 on the bottom, because I just want to get rid of one of the place values. And then I have to make sure the top also is 10. So 10 out of 10 is really 1. Take any number, divide by 1, it's still the same thing. Haven't changed it. Okay, so 1,000 divided by 10 is 100. 326 divided by 10 should be 32.6. And you can check your calculator if you want. You're just moving the decimal place one time over. So then this is 32.6%. Because percent is out of 100, we got it out of 100. So we're just taking the numerator. That's the first method. If you want to use the second method, which is just multiplying by 100%, then you are taking 0.326, multiplying by 100%. Remember, percent, not just 100. 32.6 as well, percent. You can see why people like that second method, right? All right, let's move on to example 2. Now they are giving us percents and we have to change them into decimals. So we're kind of working backwards now. For this first problem, you're probably like, wait a minute, there's already a decimal in there. Are we done? No. This is just a really small percent, okay? So remember, we have on our scale 0% to 100%, and obviously there's more going this way. So 1%, let's say, is over here. So then this would be half of a percent. This would be 0.5%. Super tiny. Okay? So a decimal can be in a percent. It's just a tinier percent. So let's write this down, 0.5%. Now percent, if you remember, is out of 100 or divide by 100. So I gotta write it as this fraction now, 0.5 or 5/10 out of 100. Now to make it into a decimal, remember, this just means divide by 100. So we can take 0.5 divided by 100 to get our answer. And so 0.5 divided by 100 is 0.005. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, wait a minute, this is basically my percent, 0.5, but it's smaller. Yeah. So another method, a shortcut that you could use is basically, since you know that you need to divide by 100, and 100 is basically 2 decimal places, you would take this decimal place and move it over 2 spots. So let me actually write this down over here so that you can see. Here's my decimal place. I'm moving it to the left 2 spots. Because 100, if you're dividing by 100, you are moving to the left because your number is getting smaller because you're performing a division. And then you're moving it over 2 spots because of the 2 place values in 100. So that's how you end up with 0.0. There's an invisible 0 here. 5. That's after you jumped over. Okay? Let's show you what we're talking about in the next problem. So in B, you have 238%. Again, if you were using that shortcut we were just talking about, you have to first locate your decimal point. If you don't see it, it's going to be right at the very end on the right-hand side. Remember, percent is out of 100 or dividing by 100. Dividing by 100, you're getting a smaller number, so that means you need to move to the left, and you're moving to the left 2 places. Okay, so move to the left 1, 2. So at the end, you should get 2.38 according to this shortcut. Let's check it with our first method, the original method. 238%. Remember, it's out of 100 because it's a percent. So we can get rid of that percent and write it out of 100 now. So in my calculator, I'm actually going to calculate 238 divided by 100. 238 divided by 100 is 2.38. Okay, so by jumping 2 spots to the left, you're basically dividing by 100 just without your calculator, because you know it's going to be a smaller number with division, so you're moving to the left, and you know every time you divide by something in the tens power, you're going to move over a decimal place. So 2.38. This answer makes sense, right? Because 1 is 100%. So 2 would be 200%. So if we have 238, it would be 2 point something. If we have 238%, it would be 2.38. So because it's slightly bigger than the 2. So percentages larger than 100% definitely exist.